Have you ever looked at someone and thought, if you really love me, then why do you feel so far away? Why do they go quiet when things get deeper? Why do they pull back right when the connection starts to feel real? Why do they make you feel chosen one moment and completely shut out the next? And maybe the question that hurts the most is this: can someone love you deeply and still not know how to show it? That question has broken a lot of hearts. Because when you care about an avoidant person, love rarely feels simple. It feels confusing. It feels unfinished. It feels like standing in front of a locked door, knowing there is something real behind it, but never knowing if it will open or close even harder. And that is what makes this kind of connection so painful, because the hardest people to walk away from are not always the ones who never felt anything. Sometimes the hardest people to walk away from are the ones who did feel something, but could not carry it in a healthy way. The ones who made you feel there was love there, but never enough clarity to rest in it. If that is something you have lived through, then stay with this until the end. Because by the time this video is over, you will understand the hidden emotional patterns avoidant people show when they care more than they can say. And more importantly, you may finally stop blaming yourself for the silence you could never decode. Because most people misunderstand avoidant love. They think distance means disinterest. They think emotional shutdown means coldness. They think inconsistency means the feelings were fake. But human psychology is rarely that simple. People are not always ruled by what they feel. Most of the time, they are ruled by what they fear. And that is where everything changes. An avoidant person can want closeness and still panic when it appears. They can miss you and still not text. They can think about you constantly and still act like nothing is happening. They can love you in ways that are real, but hidden under years of emotional self-protection. That is why this kind of love feels so confusing, because you are not dealing with someone who has no heart. You are often dealing with someone whose heart has learned to survive by staying guarded. And when people grow up learning that emotions are unsafe, closeness becomes complicated. Some people learned that love means comfort, but others learned that love means pressure. Expectation, loss of control, emotional exposure, rejection, abandonment, being misunderstood, being too much, or worse, needing someone and then getting hurt by them. So when an avoidant starts to actually care, it does not always feel good to them at first. It feels dangerous. That is the part most people never talk about. We romanticize love as something that naturally makes people open up. But for avoidant people, love can trigger the exact opposite. The more they feel, the more their nervous system starts sounding alarms. The closer they get, the more exposed they feel. The more they need you, the more they want to hide that need. Not because they are trying to play games, but because deep down, dependency feels like weakness to them. And that is why you may meet someone who acts calm, collected, independent, and emotionally in control until they start falling for you. Then suddenly they become harder to read. Hot and cold. Present and distant. Interested and withdrawn, like they are fighting something inside themselves that even they do not fully understand, because they are. Avoidant people often do not struggle with love because they are heartless. They struggle with love because real connection touches the exact wound they have spent years trying not to feel. And when that wound gets touched, they do what they have always done to survive. They pull back, they go silent, they detach, they try to regain control. They tell themselves they need space. They convince themselves they are better off alone. They focus on logic instead of emotion. They shrink the connection in their mind so they do not have to face how deeply it is affecting them. But here is what makes this so emotionally exhausting for the person on the other side. When an avoidant loves you, they often do not disappear because they feel nothing. They disappear because they feel too much. And if you do not understand that, you will spend months, maybe years, asking yourself the wrong question. You will keep asking, what did I do wrong? When the real question is often, what did love awaken in them that they were never taught how to handle? That is a very different question. Because when you start seeing avoidant behavior through that lens, something shifts. Not so you excuse everything, not so you settle for confusion, but so you stop personalizing patterns that were there long before you arrived, and that matters. Because one of the deepest psychological traps in relationships is this. When someone gives you mixed signals, your mind starts working overtime to make sense of the inconsistency. You replay conversations, you study tone, you analyze timing, you search for hidden meaning in small moments, you become emotionally addicted to trying to figure them out. And the reason that happens is because the human brain craves closure, it craves certainty, it wants emotional patterns to make sense. But avoidant love often does not give you certainty, it gives you fragments. A moment of closeness, then distance, a soft confession, then emotional shutdown, a sign they care, then silence. And those fragments can become addictive because your heart starts surviving on possibility instead of peace. That is why this topic matters so much, because some people are not stuck because they were never loved. They are stuck because they were loved in a way that was never fully expressed, never fully safe, and never fully stable. And if you do not understand the psychology behind that, you can lose yourself trying to earn clarity from someone who is still at war with vulnerability. So in this video, we are going deeper. Not into fantasy, not into excuses, not into false hope. We are going into the truth, the hidden signs, the subtle behaviors, the emotional contradictions, the silent ways avoidant people often show love when they cannot bring themselves to say the words clearly. Because once you understand those patterns, you stop chasing shadows. You start seeing people for who they really are. And sometimes that understanding does not just help you read them better, it helps you protect your own heart better too. Because love should challenge you, yes, but it should not keep you trapped in confusion forever. And the first step to freeing yourself is understanding what is really happening beneath the silence. What makes this even more painful is that many people assume emotional silence means emotional emptiness. But that is not always true. Some of the most emotionally conflicted people are not empty at all. They are overwhelmed. They are carrying feelings they were never taught how to express without feeling exposed, weak, or trapped. And when someone with avoidant patterns begins to care deeply, they often do not feel relief. They feel pressure. They feel internal resistance. They feel a quiet panic they cannot easily explain, even to themselves. That is why an avoidant person may struggle to say, "I love you" in the way most people expect. Not because the feeling is absent, but because the feeling itself activates everything they have spent years trying to control. Love asks for openness. It asks for honesty. It asks for emotional risk. And for someone who learned to survive by staying guarded, that can feel like standing on the edge of something terrifying. Their heart may move toward connection, but their nervous system pulls in the opposite direction. That is the war happening underneath the surface. Most people think love becomes difficult only when the connection is wrong, but psychology shows us something deeper. Sometimes love becomes difficult because the connection is right enough to touch an old wound. It reaches places inside them they have kept locked for years. It stirs fear of dependence, fear of losing freedom, fear of needing someone too much, fear of being seen too clearly. And once those fears wake up, expression becomes hard. Even basic affection can start to feel dangerous. That is why avoidant people often communicate through contradiction. They may feel warmth but show restraint. They may crave closeness but create emotional distance. They may want to tell you what you mean to them but stop themselves at the last second. They think the words, they feel the pull, but when it is time to let it out, something inside them tightens. Something says, don't go too far, don't reveal too much, don't lose control now. So what could have become a clear moment turns into silence again. And if you are the one receiving that silence, it can be deeply confusing because you can often feel that something is there. You can sense that they care. You can see it in the way they look at you, the way they remember things, the way they react when your energy shifts. But the emotional language never fully arrives. The reassurance stays incomplete. The vulnerability comes halfway, then disappears. And your mind starts asking the same painful question over and over again. If it is real, why does it feel so hidden? The answer is often found in what shaped them long before they met you. People do not become emotionally avoidant for no reason. Somewhere in their life, closeness likely became linked with discomfort instead of safety. Maybe they learned that feelings were inconvenient. Maybe they were ignored when they needed comfort. Maybe they were shamed for vulnerability. Maybe love came with control, criticism, unpredictability, or emotional neglect. And over time, they built an identity around self-containment. They taught themselves, do not need too much, do not reveal too much, stay composed, stay protected, stay unreachable if you have to. That identity can look strong from the outside. It can even look attractive at first. Calm, independent, unbothered, hard to impress, hard to shake. But underneath that image is often a person who never learned how to hold intimacy without feeling internally threatened. So when they finally meet someone who actually matters, their usual defenses start working overtime. The stronger the emotional bond becomes, the harder it may be for them to act naturally inside it. This is why avoidants often express affection in ways that do not sound romantic, but mean more than people realize. Instead of saying, I'm scared of how much I care about you, they may just go quiet. Instead of saying, you matter more to me than I know how to handle, they may suddenly become distant for a few days. Instead of saying, I feel vulnerable around you, they may act colder than usual. It is not mature. It is not healthy, but it is often the language of someone whose emotional wiring is built around defense instead of expression. And this is where many people get trapped emotionally. Because when love is hidden inside mixed behavior, it becomes easy to start translating everything. You begin trying to read between the lines. You start hoping the silence means depth. You start believing that if you are patient enough, understanding enough, gentle enough, they will eventually say what their actions almost reveal. But one of the hardest truths in human connection is this: hidden feeling is not the same thing as healthy communication. That truth matters. Because yes, an avoidant can care deeply. Yes, they can feel more than they show. Yes, their inability to speak clearly may come from fear, not from cruelty. But that does not erase the impact their behavior has on the person who loves them. Emotional withholding still hurts. Uncertainty still drains the nervous system. Inconsistency still creates anxiety. And if you are always the one trying to understand while they stay protected behind silence, the connection starts becoming emotionally one-sided. This is why understanding psychology is powerful, but dangerous if you use it the wrong way. Understanding someone's emotional wound should give you clarity. It should not trap you in self-abandonment. Because there is a difference between compassion and overfunctioning. There is a difference between empathy and emotional self-sacrifice. And many people lose themselves in that space. They become so focused on decoding the avoidant person's inner world that they stop asking what the connection is doing to their own peace, self-worth, and emotional stability. That is the real danger of loving someone who cannot speak their heart clearly. Not just that they stay hidden, but that you slowly start disappearing while trying to reach them. And that is why this conversation matters so much. Because before you can understand the signs of hidden love, you first have to understand the deeper truth. For an avoidant, affection is not always blocked by lack of care. It is often blocked by fear of what closeness demands, fear of being emotionally known, fear of losing control, fear of depending on something they cannot guarantee will stay. So when they fail to say what they feel, it is not always because nothing is there. Sometimes it is because something very real is there, and they do not yet have the emotional capacity to carry it out loud. And once you understand that, the behavior starts making more sense. Not easier, but clearer. And once that pattern becomes clearer, one behavior starts standing out more than anything else. They pull away, but they do not fully leave. That is one of the strongest signs that something deeper is happening inside an avoidant person. Because when they truly feel nothing, detachment is usually clean. It is flat. It is final. But when they are emotionally involved and do not know how to hold that intensity, their distance often becomes inconsistent. They create space, but not closure. They disappear, but not completely. They step back, but somehow they keep one invisible thread connected to you. And that is where so many people get emotionally stuck. Because when someone keeps returning, it keeps hope alive. It makes you believe the story is unfinished. It makes you feel like maybe this time they will finally say what they could never say before. Maybe this time they will stop running. Maybe this time the silence will break into something honest and solid. But to understand why this cycle happens, you have to look beneath the behavior itself and into the emotional mechanics behind it. Avoidant people often pull away not because the bond is weak, but because the bond starts becoming too emotionally loud inside them. The closeness reaches a point where it begins to challenge the inner structure they have relied on for years. That structure says, stay independent, stay self-contained, do not let anyone become too central. So when attachment starts growing beyond what feels manageable, their system responds the only way it knows how, by creating distance. That distance is not always logical. It can happen right after a beautiful moment, right after a deep conversation, right after trust starts building, right after they begin feeling safe enough to care more. And to the other person, that timing can feel cruel, because it looks like they are backing away from something good. But psychologically, what often happens is this. The very moment connection starts becoming meaningful is the moment their fear system gets activated. That is why many avoidants retreat after intimacy instead of before it. The more real it becomes, the harder it is for them to regulate, so they may suddenly become slower to reply, less expressive, harder to reach, less emotionally available than they were just days earlier. And if you are on the receiving end of that shift, it can feel like emotional whiplash. You start replaying everything. You wonder if you said too much, needed too much, asked for too much, or moved too fast. But often, what changed was not your worth. What changed was the level of closeness they started feeling, and that closeness scared them. Still, what makes this dynamic so psychologically revealing is not just that they pull away. It is that after creating that distance, many of them come back in subtle ways. Sometimes it is a message that seems casual but is emotionally loaded. Sometimes it is a random check-in after days of silence. Sometimes it is a reaction, a memory, a small excuse to reconnect. Sometimes it is simply their energy returning after you started to emotionally release them. They may not come back with full vulnerability. They may not come back with answers, but they come back enough to show that the bond never left their internal world. That return matters, because it often reveals that their withdrawal was not emotional absence. It was emotional overwhelm. This is one of the most painful truths about avoidant attachment. They often leave to regulate, not to resolve. They step away to reduce the intensity inside themselves. They isolate to feel in control again. They disconnect externally so they can quiet what is happening internally. But once that emotional pressure settles, the attachment often resurfaces. The missing starts again. The curiosity returns. The connection they tried to suppress starts pulling at them once more. And that is why they circle back. Not always in a healthy way. Not always with growth, but often with evidence that they never became as unaffected as they tried to appear. This is where people often misread the situation. They think the return means readiness. They assume coming back means the person has finally become clear, stable, and emotionally available. But return and readiness are not the same thing. Someone can miss you deeply and still not be capable of building something secure. Someone can feel your absence powerfully and still not know how to stay close in a consistent way. That is the difference between emotional pull and emotional maturity. And if you do not understand that difference, you can get trapped in a cycle that feels like love, but slowly drains your spirit. Because intermittent connection is powerful on the human mind. Psychology shows that unpredictability creates stronger emotional fixation than consistency. When affection comes in fragments instead of stability, the brain often becomes more attached, not less. It starts chasing the return. It starts surviving on small signs. It becomes hyper-focused on the possibility of closeness instead of the reality of confusion. That is why this kind of connection can feel so hard to walk away from. Not because it is nourishing, but because it is unfinished. The human heart struggles with open loops. It wants completion. It wants clarity. It wants to know what something meant. And when an avoidant keeps reappearing without fully arriving, they keep that loop alive. They keep the emotional door slightly open. Not enough for peace, just enough for hope. And hope, when attached to inconsistency, can become a very dangerous thing, because it makes you invest in potential while your actual emotional needs remain unmet. This does not mean every avoidant who returns is manipulative. That would be too simplistic. Many of them are not trying to hurt anyone. Many are genuinely confused by their own emotional patterns. They do feel the loss. They do feel the pull. They do think about reaching out, and sometimes coming back is the only way they know how to stay connected without fully confronting the vulnerability the connection demands. But intention does not erase impact. And this is what people need to understand at a deeper level. When someone repeatedly pulls away and then reappears, it usually means the attachment is alive, but the emotional capacity is unstable. There is feeling, but not enough internal safety. There is longing, but not enough relational skill. There is care, but not enough groundedness to carry that care in a clear, steady form. That is why their behavior feels so mixed. Part of them wants closeness. Another part still treats closeness like a threat. And until those two parts are faced honestly, the cycle keeps repeating. So if someone has ever gone distant, only to return again when you started letting go, do not ignore what that pattern is trying to tell you. It is often not random. It is often not meaningless. It is often a silent confession in the only language they currently know how to speak. I feel this too. I just don't know how to stay inside it. And when someone does not know how to stay inside what they feel, they often reveal themselves in quieter ways than most people notice. Because one of the biggest mistakes people make with avoidant individuals is assuming that if they are not openly expressive, then they are not emotionally present. But that is not always how attachment works. Some people do not reveal care through intensity. They reveal it through attention, through what they quietly hold on to, through what they notice when they think no one sees them noticing. That is why one of the clearest signs an avoidant cares is this. They remember things you thought passed right by them, not the obvious things, not the things anyone could easily repeat, but the small details, the private ones, the ones you mentioned once and forgot about, the mood behind your words, the subtle changes in your energy, the hidden meaning inside something you said casually. They may not respond in a dramatic way when it happens. They may not comfort you in the exact language you need. But often, they are absorbing far more than they let on. And this matters more than people realize, because emotionally guarded people are usually selective with what they let in. They are not always verbally available, but that does not mean they are disconnected from your presence. In fact, when an avoidant begins to care, their awareness of you can become much deeper than their communication ever reveals. They may appear detached on the surface, while internally tracking your patterns with surprising precision. They notice when your tone changes. They notice when your energy drops. They notice when you are trying to act okay, but are not. They notice what makes you light up and what quietly shuts you down. And many times they carry those details silently because remembering feels safer than expressing. That is the hidden part people miss. Expression requires vulnerability. Observation does not. So instead of saying, I pay attention because you matter to me, they just store the information. Quietly, deeply, almost protectively. They remember your favorite comfort. They recall what kind of day drains you. They hold on to the little stories you told when you were relaxed and not trying to impress anyone. They remember what hurt you, what shaped you, and what made you pull back in the past. And the strange thing is, they may remember those things even when they act emotionally distant. That contradiction can be confusing, but psychologically it makes perfect sense. Because memory is often where emotionally avoidant people place what they cannot easily express in real time. If they are not good at direct affection, they may become good at quiet retention. If they struggle to verbalize care, they may hold on to details as a private form of attachment. And that is why sometimes the strongest proof is not what they say when things are calm. It is what they remember when you least expect it. A date you mentioned once. A fear you confessed months ago. A random preference you thought no one cared about. A sentence you forgot saying. And when those details come back later, it can feel almost shocking. Because it reveals that while you thought they were distant, some part of them was deeply tuned in. That does not mean they are emotionally healthy. It does not mean they are automatically capable of building the kind of connection you need. But it does reveal something important. Indifference usually does not remember with that kind of depth. People do not store your emotional fingerprints unless something in them has been touched. And this is where a lot of people get confused in relationships like this. Because attention without reassurance creates emotional tension. You start noticing that they know you. They remember you. They pick up on things others miss. And that can feel incredibly intimate. It can make you feel seen in a way that is hard to walk away from. Because being deeply observed by someone who rarely opens up can feel powerful. It can feel meaningful. It can make you believe that if they notice this much, then surely their feelings must run deeper than their silence suggests. And often they do. But this is where emotional maturity becomes the real issue. Because noticing your pain is not the same as knowing how to hold it. Remembering your needs is not the same as meeting them. Being mentally attentive is not the same as being relationally available. And many people get trapped because they confuse being seen with being safely loved. That distinction is everything, because yes, an avoidant may remember your wounds, but if they still trigger them through inconsistency, the memory alone is not enough. Yes, they may recall your soft spots, but if they still struggle to show up with emotional steadiness, the awareness does not automatically create security. This is why understanding behavior through psychology is so important. It helps you read what is real without turning it into fantasy. When someone remembers your details, it usually means you matter. When they hold on to your emotional world, it usually means you left a mark. When they bring up things you thought they ignored, it often means their connection to you runs deeper than their words ever admitted. But none of that should blind you to the bigger truth. Care that stays hidden too long can still become painful, because if you are constantly being quietly understood but rarely openly reassured, your nervous system stays unsettled. You keep feeling the presence of something meaningful but never fully receiving the safety that should come with it. And over time, that creates its own kind of emotional exhaustion. This is why so many people stay attached to avoidant partners longer than they expected, not only because of what was given, but because of what was subtly revealed, the remembered detail, the unexpected recall, the way they noticed things no one else did, the way they held onto your emotional blueprint without ever fully admitting how much it meant. That kind of attention can feel intimate enough to keep your hope alive, and hope grows quickly when you believe someone understands you at a deep level. But this is the hard truth human psychology teaches again and again. Being deeply noticed can make you feel bonded, even when your core needs are still going unmet. So if you have ever been confused by someone who seemed emotionally closed, but somehow remembered the smallest parts of you, do not dismiss that. It usually means something. It often means more than they know how to say, because people reveal their heart in different ways. Some do it with language, some do it with consistency, and some, especially the ones who fear emotional exposure the most, do it by quietly carrying pieces of you long after the moment has passed. That is not nothing. That is attachment trying to speak without words.